views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, nice to see you again. It is time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to journalists and writers and editors and even sometimes photographers and filmmakers, videographers, all those kinds of things. Anybody putting something out in the Bronx so you can get some insight as to a little more about what's going on. This evening we are thrilled. We're going to talk to two really good writers about two very, very interesting and important subjects going on in the Bronx. Number one, we're going to talk about the potential for a new soccer stadium. And then number two, we are going to talk about the plastic bag ban, which begins on March 1st. But right now, we're going to literally the soccer guru, the stadium guru of all time. He wrote the book Field of Schemes. My good buddy, Neil deMause, nice to have you back on Bronx Buzz.
Hey, Gary, good to be here.
So let's see, the Times put out an article that some people were like, oh, wow, that's interesting. And some people like yourself said, wait a minute, what are they really saying here? And I'll just recap. They were alleging that the movement to have a soccer stadium for the New York City Football Club would be on 153rd Street, where the GAL elevator factory is, as well as tear down a big parking lot and some other amenities. What do you think? Is that happening? Did the Times jump the gun here? Where are we at with the potential for a soccer stadium in that part of the Bronx?
I mean, the Times has been reporting on this for a while, right? They came out with a big story, I think, summer of 2018, saying that NYCFC and some developers were looking at that area just south of the old Yankee Stadium, where the park is now, for a new soccer stadium, which, of course, the team has been trying to find a place to build a soccer-only stadium since before it even existed. They were looking at Flushing Meadows Park. They were looking at Pier 40 at one point. They were looking at a site on the Harlem River waterfront. They, have been all over the city. And the big question here really is, even if the site can work, right? It's possible that certainly nobody needs that triangle garage anymore, right? It wasn't really that useful for the old stadium, and it's certainly not for the new Yankee Stadium.
Because it's actually farther away than the
right.
New stadium is. That's correct.
Right. And really you don't want to be encouraging more people to drive to the games. I think fewer people are driving to the games, especially with the new Metro North stop. So, they really just don't need that. However, the Yankees have in their lease this clause that the city has to provide the parking, so they still have that garage. I don't have a firm grasp on what the implications would be of closing down 153rd Street. Obviously, it's sort of a major road, and there's the off-ramp for the Deegan there, right? So there's a bunch of questions you would still need to ask.
I'm going to throw one other question, which was raised a little while ago when the notion of the soccer stadium came out, and that is a replacement. I mean, the GAL is not out of business, and you are certainly going to need a place to relocate the plant. Now, maybe there will be a place, but the Times article didn't say that. You and I had a brief interaction, frankly, on social media, because the headline said they're an inch away from, having this soccer stadium. But the reality is, and you correctly pointed out, there's nothing actually in the article that says it's imminent. It says that there's still community review that has to be done and all those other, kinds of things. So I don't know. Are we talking ourselves in circles and we don't really have an answer yet? I guess I don't know.
Yeah, no, and I've since talked to people at NYCFC who said, yeah, no, it's not imminent. We're continuing to talk. We're going to keep reaching out to the community, or I guess start reaching out to the community, because there hasn't really been a lot of community discussion yet. It's probably, we're still talking about months before there's any kind of proposal, and then you still have to go through the city land use process, which is going to be another year after that. So we're still a ways off, but I feel like the the basic question that still needs to be answered is, obviously, where do you move the elevator plant? How do you deal with closing the street? But who's going to pay for this, right? And that's the other thing. They've been trying to figure out where to build a stadium for all these years. But the bigger question is, it costs an awful lot of money to build a new stadium. And the amount of money that you bring in from an MLS team is not that huge, especially when you're just talking about playing in a soccer-only stadium versus playing in Yankee Stadium.
And they don't quite have the TV contracts.
They're selling tickets, right?
They don't have the TV contracts that really a lot of times, provide the financial foundation. There was also a point in there which Bronxites would be very interested in. There was also a point in there about decommissioning, I guess, an off-ramp from the Deegan. Now, that is a major thing because it involves the state, involves the highways, and then ultimately they would convert that to a pedestrian walkway, allegedly, for one of the waterfront parks. And where I'm going with this is then at the bottom of the article, they talked about the plan will include affordable housing. The plan will include all kinds of stuff. I got to tell you something. I cover the Bronx every single day. When you talk about a stadium, not only in that very sensitive area, very busy area with the Bronx Terminal Market, the Children's Museum coming, the Hip Hop Museum is going to be down there, Bronx Point is going to be down there, and the New York Yankees are there. That is a very sensitive area. And if you were to build that in any Bronx neighborhood, in the climate in the borough of the Bronx right now, there's a lot of people who are going to want to weigh in about the implications of it. I don't know what else to tell you.
Yeah, I think that whoever put out that story that ended up in the Times, that it was think that momentum was going ahead on this, is clearly trying to push this as this is going to be a win-win for everybody. We're going to get affordable housing, and we'll get a soccer stadium, and we'll get jobs, and we'll get all this.
Where have I been?
Maybe, right? But until you actually have a plan which says how it's going to be paid for, where it's going to go, what the jobs are going to be, how you're going to, right? I mean, how the traffic's going to work. There's almost nothing to talk about. So it's like, sure, in the abstract, a soccer stadium that, brings amenities could be nice. But, as we've seen with lots of stadiums in the past, including the new Yankee Stadium, right? The promises and the reality don't always match up.
I feel like asking the question, haven't we been down this road before? I mean, we've seen these kinds of things all the time. I do want to ask you about another aspect of it that has been thrown out there in op-ed form, and I believe you had commented even privately to me about it because I think I asked you about it, and that is the notion of which came up, I believe, from the bid director at 161st Street. That is the notion of having it be fan-owned, much like, let's say, the Green Bay Packers, and they would sell stock in the New York City Football Club for the building of the stadium. So therefore, the community not only would have input, but would have ownership of the property and all the other, construction things. What's your thought?
I mean, it's a great idea, but the problem is that there really isn't that much money to be gotten out of stadiums, right? So when you talk about the construction cost, the amount of money that comes in from the stadium itself, right? I mean, the ticket sales go to the team, and the concession sales go to the team, right? So what's left? Like naming rights, and maybe I don't know what else there is. Some ad signage you could put up. So my concern is that if people in the Bronx bought this stadium, they would end up owning something that they didn't want.
Number one, that they didn't want, that may be a financial boondoggle, which would be the worst thing that could happen of all. But the other thing I would say, we're talking about one of the poorest counties in the state. And it may even be the Bronx is the poorest county in the nation. Certainly that congressional district that the stadium actually sits in is the poorest congressional district in the nation. Who's spending money? I mean, I could see people saying, hey, for $50, I got a brick or I get a piece of ownership. But in order to raise money for a stadium, you're going to need people with big money, and then you're essentially taking it out of the hands of the borough of the Bronx, because Bronx people, in plain language, I mean, we don't have the money here to do that.
Yeah, and there's just so many other things that you could be doing for Bronx. I mean, I think this is just another example of a case where, the projects that get put forward are the ones that people with big money behind it want to get put forward. Whereas, it's very seldom that you see some kind of community-based plan, that may or may not be more beneficial. Get to this kind of level. Get to headlines in the New York Times.
Yeah, and we only have a moment left, but just thinking about even how Yankee Stadium ultimately, was built. so many complaints, and I'll tell you, I've been by Heritage Field, where the old stadium used to be, even in the summertime, and I don't see it being used. I mean, one would think you'd have kids on there, you'd have teams, and I realize I'm not there all the time, so I'm sure somebody's using it, but I would think it would be overbooked. But I've been there on late afternoons on a summer day, and I'm like, well, aren't they supposed to be using this field when the need is just so? So anyway, I don't. That's just a comment. I don't know what else to tell you about where we're going with this. On the other hand, let's think positively. It'd be nice to have kind of an area where there's stadiums, where there's things going on. But alas, at this particular moment, who knows what's going to be.
Yeah, and the problem with stadiums, of course, is that, as you see with Yankee Stadium, is that they're closed most of the time, right? Nothing's going on at Yankee Stadium right now because it's February, and I forget how many home games. I think 17 home games a year for MLS. That's an awful lot of days when nothing would be going on there.
Yeah, I don't really know. Listen, Neil, you are the best, because I don't know who else I would call if I needed to know what the reality is and what the possibilities are. And Field of Schemes, I guess it's not a very positive sounding name, but it is descriptive of the way stadiums have been built all across the country. We thank you so much.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
All right, we'll see you around town. All right, there he is, and there he goes. That is Neil deMause over there in Brooklyn, but we allowed him to be on the Bronx program anyway because he really knows his stuff when it comes to stadiums. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to get into plastic bags. Maybe I should get a plastic, but go to a tree and pull down a bag, and we can show you what the plastic bags look like. We'll be right back.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self, and I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry.
Go long, son!
it's always worth it.
Whoa, master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
From deMause Do-It-Yourselfie, where we recreate the hottest looks from today's biggest music videos.
After cleaning out our closet, we have a lot of clothes we don't wear anymore.
Like this old t-shirt.
It's not garbage, it's actually a brand new rug.
And to make it, all you need to do is cut, tie, and glue.
Cut the t-shirt into strips.
Tie the strips into knots.
And glue the knots to the bath mat. I love it. Give your garbage another life.
And recycle.
Hey, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. We are right now going to go all the way up to Albany, New York, and say hello to our buddy Zach Williams, who writes for City and State New York. Hi, Zach. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Zach, we've been doing this show for, 3-4 years already. This is the most majestic Skype shot we've ever had with the assembly chambers right behind you. So good for you. You get points for that before we even start. Congratulations. What's going on in the assembly today? Anything interesting? A busy day, not a busy day? You may as well give us the update.
Well, I think all the talk in the Capitol today is this bail reform proposal that the state Senate Democrats announced earlier in the day. Really stirs up a lot of the balance of power between the governor, state Senate, and the Assembly on this really critical issue. For now, though, looks like the Assembly is holding its ground, so we'll see what happens in the weeks ahead as budget negotiations get underway.
I really appreciate you saying that, because obviously this has been a major point of contention. Has the state Senate put out a proposal to revise what has been a controversial plan?
I think what's really new with their proposal is this idea of completely eliminating cash bail while also giving judges an enormous amount of discretion to decide who is and who does and does not deserve to be held in jail pre-trial. While it is new in the budget negotiations this year, it does bear a lot of resemblance to what the governor proposed last year, but that's all well and good by some of the suburban Democrats who are really important for if the Democrats want to maintain their majority after 2020.
Yeah, it could even turn into a national issue, depending on, of course, how the presidential race is saying, well, Democrats are light on crime or whatever. So it bears watching. What I really did want to talk to you about, that obviously is a huge issue, and we'll watch it unfold, is the plastic bag ban. And the way it works, beginning, we're in the middle of February, 5-6 weeks, you will not be able to get plastic bags in the stores. Why don't you give us a little background about that, and then we'll talk about some of the implications and some of the alternatives.
Well, plastic bags might not catalyze as much impassioned disagreement as cash bail, but it was a pretty contentious issue in state budget negotiations last year. The deal that the state Senate, Assembly, and the governor came up with basically bans disposable plastic bags in all retail establishments starting March 1st. That doesn't mean all plastic bags are going away. Certain exemptions were made for fresh food, like meat and vegetables, as well as things that are more niche in their uses, like packaging for larger things than you tend to buy at a retail store. That said, local counties can charge 5 cents on paper bags, but that's on a county by county basis. So right now it remains to be seen whether consumers are going to start bringing in their own reusable bags to replace the plastic bags that they can no longer get, or whether paper bags are simply going to take the place of the plastic bags that we've become so familiar with.
Yeah, this has so many implications. Number one of the stories that had come out over the previous week or two was that there aren't enough paper bags. I mean, the paper bag manufacturers, they're not going to be able to turn out the amount of the volume that you need to replace those plastic bags. Go into any deli or grocery anywhere, and we're in the Bronx, and they're putting out plastic bags like crazy. There's no way that there will be enough paper bags to substitute for that, even if you are charging a nickel a bag.
Well, I think that's all well and good as far as environmentalists are concerned. They really, in addition to removing plastic bags from landfills and from polluting the landscape, what they really want consumers to do is switch to those cloth or really thick plastic reusable bags that some of us use, but maybe not enough to really make a difference. Now that plastic bags are out of the equation and there's supposedly this shortage of paper bags, I think that only gives people more incentive to switch to reusable bags. It is going to take a change in behavior, though. I, for one, have not gotten quite used to carrying cloth bags wherever I go, but that's what environmentalists want, and it could make a difference in terms of how much plastic does end up in landfills moving forward. And more importantly, if a change of behavior could be made on something as small as the bags that we use at retail outlets, then maybe bigger changes in behavior are possible as efforts continue to combat climate change.
And certainly we could talk, maybe we'll have you on another time and talk about the whole recycling spectrum. But, just talking about how people behave. Now, just perfectly honestly, when I know that I'm going grocery shopping, I will grab 2 or 3 large reusable bags and go and we'll do that. But let's say you're at work and you're on the way home from work, honey, grab a container of milk, and you run into the supermarket. You don't have a bag. I guess you could buy a paper bag. I'm not sure how that dynamic works. And you're talking about changing behavior. I don't know, maybe this is the way to, through legislation you can change behavior, because all you got to do is look anywhere in the Bronx, whether you look at, garbage cans in the street, whether you look in the trees, where you walk down the block and you see them blowing across the plastic bags are everywhere. And certainly environmentalists, everybody knows that the plastic is literally suffocating the planet.
I think that really gets of a big issue that critics of the plastic bag ban have brought up in recent weeks, the implementation. You just mentioned this reported shortage of paper bags. A lot of people are still wondering, what will and will not be counted under the ban. There's been some concerns by environmentalists that the language of new regulations from the Department of Environmental Conservation would actually allow a lot of bodegas to continue using plastic bags for purposes other than fresh food. Now, the DEC told me that was not so, but there are exemptions written into the law that would allow businesses to continue using plastic bags if no ready alternative is available.
I got 2 points about that. Number one, it seems crazy, but I can't wait until there's a news story in the New York Post, and I'm sure it'll be front page news, that a deli gets fined because they gave out plastic bags. What a news story that is going to be. They're going to say, look at what this wrought, and this store owner is going to say, I got to pay a fine because I'm just trying to run a business here? I mean, I could see that happening.
Well, I think ultimately it would be up to the Department of Environmental Conservation how they want to enforce the ban. Right. But I think you do raise another concern that people have had about the implementation of this law. When do you not only tell businesses to stop using disposable plastic bags, but when do you bring the hammer of enforcement down on those businesses that still flout the law or, for whatever reason, have not been able to implement it in their own retail establishment?
Potentially because they didn't get a hold of paper bags, that kind of thing. The other thing is, I understand in the legislation is that kind of heavier, and you mentioned it actually earlier, heavier plastic bags are okay. Now, I mean, I know for myself, we use big plastic bags to, discard maybe the big pile of paper that we're taking down to recycling. That's even more plastic than the use of plastic than the normal grocery plastic bags that you get, and you could buy boxes of those things.
So the original legislation that passed in the budget didn't mention anything about the thickness of a plastic bag that would or would not be allowed once this law goes into effect. That actually comes from regulations that the Department of Environmental Conservation has put out that will go into effect on March 1st. That say that any bag that is less than 10 mils thick would not be allowed under the ban. For a little bit of comparison's sake, about a 0.5 mil, which is a thousandth of an inch, is kind of the thickness of your typical disposable bag you might get at a bodega or at any other store. Now, any resourceful New Yorker might call a bag like that reusable to some degree, but some plastic bag bans, like one in Ulster County, tried to preempt the use, tried to keep this standard that any plastic bag beyond a certain thickness, in the case of Ulster County, it was 4 mils, would still be allowed because it's supposedly reusable enough, durable enough, if you will.
So you could use that bag and then reuse it. I get it. I see what you're saying, yeah.
Now, what environmentalists are afraid of is that retail establishments are now going to make bags that are thicker than this 10 mil standard set by the department for the statewide ban. Now, the commissioner of the DEC, Basil Sagos, emphatically told me that that will never happen. Not only are such bags not manufactured, but there's not even equipment to do that.
Wow.
For comparison, he says that 10 mil is about as thick as like a plastic tarp that you would use for some type of industrial use, like on a construction site. So if retail establishments did use a bag that was 10 mil or more thick, it would certainly be one heck of a durable bag.
Yeah.
Now, one other group that's really interested in this 10 mil standard are the plastic bag manufacturers.
Right.
They obviously want to protect their bottom line. And they say that if you make the 10 mil standard, then that's only going to incentivize more plastic to be used in bags. Of course, their argument that, that allowing thinner bags is actually more environmentally sustainable is a little bit,
specious,
shall we say, beneficial to their own interests.
Yeah, right. Oh,
because they're arguing that the thinner the bag, that we got to use some plastic, so why not just use the plastic disposable bags they already manufacture? That, of course, it takes us full circle to the original problem, which is that there's so many, over 20 billion plastic bags that end up in landfills every year across New York State.
Yeah, that is of course the bottom line. There are aspects of what you just described as self-defeating. One other last point that I just want to bring up, and I do it in my own home, and maybe you do too. We use if we do go to the grocery and you get a couple of groceries and you get a plastic bag, we use those to for our garbage, and so there is some other use. I'm not sure what we're going to do once we don't have a supply of those bags. I guess we would use paper to throw in. I don't know, and I don't know how that will play. But that's a very real concept, I think, for a lot of New Yorkers, a lot of Bronxites.
Well, you're a true New Yorker, that's for sure. Anybody that gets so many of those single-use, double-packed bags that we get all the time inevitably sticks them in the cupboard and use them for the small trash cans that might be around the house. That's all going to end. So you're either going to have to buy those bags. Trash bags are allowed, after all, under the plastic bag ban, but they're going to be thicker than those thinner ones we used before. Then again, maybe we're all just going to have to take better care of our trash cans and throw the garbage right straight into it and dump it into a bigger bag later on.
Well, also
that is going to be more of a hassle.
Also, have the city expand its composting programs, which, they're picking up composting in buildings. I know where I live, they pick up composting. Anyway, Zach, fascinating dialogue. You look wonderful standing there in the beautiful Regal Assembly chambers. And I guess we'll see you around town and we'll have you on the next time something wacky happens. Certainly the bail reform is going to be next on our list, for sure.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, all the best. Take care. That's Zach Williams up there in Albany. And that is your buzz for this evening. We will see you next week. Monday night, what do we got on Bronx Talk Monday night? I believe we'll have Assemblyman, speaking of the Assembly, we'll have Assemblyman Michael Benedetto. Good night.